Hello everyone, it's Amanda Stott here, Subject Coordinator for NRS123, and this recording will present advice in relation to preparing and presenting assessment to your legal case study. So what I'm going to cover in the recording, hopefully any of the questions that you might have, and I've looked at the discussion boards and tried to amalgamate any of the questions that students might have in relation to the assessment. So I'm going to go through as many things as I can think of, but certainly I think in the first instance, prior to doing anything, it's really important that you ensure that you have read page 11 of the subject outline regarding your assessment. I'll pull that up in a minute, but make sure that you've clearly read through what's required and you're quite clear on expectations. So what I'll cover in the recording is I will just present a preliminary overview of why it is important that you're doing this assessment. I think students always like to know they're going to invest a lot of time and effort into preparing this assessment, which is worth 30 marks or 30% of your entire scoring availability. But also more broadly, it's not about just gaining marks. It's a lot of thought goes into preparing assessment tasks for students to ensure that they're very authentic, which means that, you know, for example, you'll note that the legal case study here, you know, it's something that you may very well have to do in clinical practice. So it'll be very relevant for you to have knowledge and understanding of, well, how to prepare a legal statement. I'm also going to cover just some advice in relation to accessing resources for this assessment, and also I will cover how to plan and set out the assessment. I'm going to talk about the importance of the marking rubric, which is very generic and is applicable to any of your subjects, and also just a little bit about Turnitin for those of you who are unfamiliar with that. So let's begin by just looking at the assessment task per se, and most importantly, providing you with a rationale for why you're actually doing this assessment. So I've come to your subject outline, which you all should be very familiar with by now. It's accessible on the left hand side taskbar, and I'm just scrolling down to obviously the legal case study. So due date, it's due on the 19th of September. I'm sure that your campus lecturers, if they haven't already done so, for those on-campus students in particular, you are now preparing to go on a 4-week break where the university is in recess for 2 weeks, and then for a large majority of you, you will be on a workplace learning prac. For those of you who are not, essentially there are no classes for 4 weeks. We do resume on the 17th, or is it the 18th of September? So suffice to say that your first week back for on-campus students on classes, this assessment is due in that week. For online students, well, obviously some of you may be on workplace learning, some of you may not, but regardless, be mindful of the due date, and also it's being organised. I recognise that things can happen, but please follow the instructions and the rules and regulations in relation to applying for extensions. It's viewed very poorly when, you know, within 2 days, or, you know, even on the day of due dates when students apply for extensions, and you have to have appropriate documentation. So make sure you do the right thing there. The return date is the 12th of October, so all being well, should you submit your assignment by the due date, you will expect to have it within a 3-week turnaround, or at the 3-week turnaround. So yes, so you'll have feedback on that. So assessment 1, which is been and gone, and here we are, legal case study, value 30%, it's 1,500 words, and you have to submit it via EASE. Many of you will have completed session 1 for our first year on-campus full-time students, so they're quite familiar with the EASE submission process. For those of you who might be new to the university or have just commenced mid-year, you will need to do a little bit of extra finding out about that, and I can take you to the website. That you have to read up on that, make sure you don't leave things to the last minute, because that's when panic and stress can occur. And also, just for example, you do have to submit a Turnitin report with this assessment, and making sure that you understand how to submit your assessment through Turnitin to receive a report. There are resources available, and I do allude to them throughout this presentation. Now, this task requires you to respond to 4 questions per se. So, the overview, there are circumstances in healthcare when a health professional may be required to prepare a legal statement. Consequently, it is important that you have understanding of the protocols to be followed or guidelines to be followed in relation to preparing a statement in the event that you're asked to provide one. So just in terms of your rationale, why you're doing it. So the purpose of this assessment task is to broaden your understanding of legal aspects of nursing practice, with particular focus on the area of professional literacy. Throughout our session in study, we have looked at a number of cases, and I think we have, certainly in the case of one case in particular where it was to do with assault. The RN was charged with assault in the nursing home, and of course we looked at the case of assistant in nursing Boyton, who was asked to prepare a statement on her version of events. Look, that statement was, in terms of, it certainly presented a good account of the events that took place, but I think you would be aware that there were lots of problems with it. There were spelling errors and so forth. And obviously it was quite apparent that AIN Boyton hadn't received advice or support in preparing that statement. So there's no doubt that, there may be times in your professional career that you will have to prepare a legal statement, and it goes without saying that it's important that you have the knowledge and skills necessary to do that, because it's also important for you from an accountability perspective. It's, it's a professional expectation. It can protect yourself. You can, if you're ever in a coronial inquiry or have to appear as a witness, if you're ever subpoenaed, the quality of your writing and your ability to present yourself, has to be top notch. And, of course, we can all work on that. So there's the rationale for why you're doing it. So, going back to what you've been asked to do, there are 4 elements or 4 parts to this case study. You are to prepare a response to all 4 elements or questions using the trigger scenario provided. All right, so it is advisable that before you begin to draft your assessment, you conduct a search of the relevant literature. And I'll talk about that in a little minute. So that's the task. The rationale is that you have to answer these 4 questions. The topic area or the key words to look at are, you are to prepare a legal statement. That's for question 4. But you've also got to present your knowledge of the circumstances where in nursing, you may be asked to prepare a legal statement, so you have to do some reading to find out the answers to those. In what circumstances, where would you might, be asked to prepare a statement? And I've already mentioned some of them if you've been listening. Demonstrate you understand the legal issue intrinsic or central to this scenario, which has prompted the need for preparation of a legal statement. So, again, we're well into the subject, and you should have an awareness now of what is problematic here. So you have 400 words there to pick out what the situation is, the professional legal situation that has prompted the need for the preparation of this legal statement. Question 3, which is 400 words, discuss 4 key guidelines or protocols that are important to consider when preparing a legal statement. Provide a clear rationale for each protocol. So if you do the background reading very well, which you're going to find out what a legal statement is, why you prepare them, how to prepare them, you'll find out the answers to these questions and be able to answer appropriately. And then using the scenario provided, prepare your mini written statement using the guidelines you have learned from your search of the relevant literature, and from the perspective of you, the first-year nursing student, you have to write your mini statement based on what's happened here, and that's 500 words. All right, so this is an actual case that I've adapted from the NMBA versus Supregi, and this was in the South Australian Healthcare Complaints Tribunal. It was this case was heard, so I've adapted some of it. So it was an actual case. It's been amended somewhat. Obviously, names have been changed, but nonetheless, it's straight from the clinical arena and from the legal situation. So there's nothing made up about this, unfortunately. So I think that sort of covers what you've got to do, and now we'll move on to looking at how you can prepare and what resources to access. Now, for many of you who are embarking on any assessment preparation, it can be particularly daunting, where to start. And I think I've given you some key trigger points here. It's really important that you do some background reading or start to look through the material that will be available to you in finding out what a legal statement is, because once you start to get literature on legal statements and how to prepare them, then a lot of the answers that you're being asked to do will start to become apparent. You'll be able to prepare your responses to them. So let's look at some of the resources. But even going back a step further, for many of you, academic writing can present some challenges, and it is important to self-reflect on your own capabilities. And it's important to do that because that will give you a determination on exactly how organized you need to be, how much work you need to expend on, being able to do well, and what resources to access. And what am I talking about there? It's, for example, if you know that you're very new or very rusty, or you haven't written academically for a long time, it's really important that you know to access the Allen team, for example. They have the assignment draft feedback service, which I'll take you to in a minute, and that can be an excellent means of providing you with objective feedback on what your referencing looks like, what your punctuation, what your sentence structure and paragraphing looks like, because obviously your lecturers can't do that for you. There is an expectation that at university level that you are able to write. However, everyone's at different levels. So it is your responsibility to use the resources that are available to you and plan accordingly. Again, just a tip. It's important to begin early with assessment too, because if you, for example, prepare a draft and then you have to submit it for the feedback service, it's all nice to have a 24-hour turnaround, but remember there's thousands of students at university, and the Allen team are a small but very good unit, but it's all about being prepared early and getting your draft in plenty of time so that you get feedback in a timely manner and able to respond accordingly. So what I'm going to do now is actually just take you to your student homepage and just take you through some of the the online resources that are available for any of your assignments, including study tips and guides. If you're not familiar with them, you'll find this useful. Now, the screen that I have in front of me, most of you will be very familiar with, is your student homepage or your dashboard. And this is where obviously you can find lots of information in relation to your enrolment, how to access transcripts and policies and so forth, as well as services and support, counselling, and so on. Library, that's excellent. We will look in that in a little minute, but the one that I'm going to take you to now is just the study section. So if you click on that tab there and you come down to learning support, this is the team that I'm talking about. The Allen team are a university support network of skilled people who can help you in any area to do with academic literacy, learning, and or numeracy. They offer support. So they've got the new Access Assignment Feedback, which is, I'll click on that link in a minute. However, I just want to make sure that you are available on this tab, the learning support, just what is available to you. Obviously, if you're near a university, you can arrange a face-to-face appointment. You can organise those. The assignment feedback sent service now, you can actually just draft and submit that online. And there's lots of different, how to succeed successfully and, do well at university. The study guides and tips I find a really useful overview. It's always, some people are very different. They need face-to-face, but some people are quite autonomous, and they can look at, information that's online and do quite well. So writing at uni, writing your first assignment, academic writing style, there's lots of little tips and fact sheets. Obviously, you're not doing an essay for this assignment, but certainly how to quote, how to use linking words, how to edit and proof. You'll find a wealth of information here that, it's time consuming, but it's well worth the effort in trying to do well. And if you put the work in at the front end, then you can get your draft, do your best, put it to the experts online. They can provide feedback for you. Where you're going to fall down is if you are rushing, you leave everything to the last minute, and you don't do the background work in terms of, preparation, how to, reference and so on. So a lot of you might have come in, for the online students, for example, they've come in with, substantial credit. And, again, you might have not completed first session at uni, but you haven't written for a while. And that's why I'm really encouraging you to access these resources, refresh your memory, and use the online submission of draft process. So that, again, all of those resources are under the study tab, and there's a whole lot of information there. Now, access assignment feedback, what I'm talking about, if you're very organized, and you prepare your assessment in draft form, Allen can review your draft assignment and offer advice on a range of academic skills. Well, you won't have an intro or a conclusion for this assignment because it is, again, not an essay. It's just responding to those 4 questions. But they certainly can respond and provide feedback on your ability to construct sentences and paragraphs, your research and your referencing style, and your spelling, grammar, and punctuation. So it's very straightforward. Once you have your file, you just submit it, put the code, and so on. And then the academic skill, if you're really concerned, for example, with your referencing style, you would make that note so that the learning skills advisor can look at that and then get back to you. So there we are. That's the draft assignment form. I really do encourage you to look at that and make sure you avail yourself of it. Now, the other important area that I think is really useful to look at is just your, where is it? Apologies for that, I just had to get to the other screen. I'm still on the study link tab, and you'll probably have this study essentials, but where I'm directing you to is, there's referencing, assignment submission and return, and this is how to submit to EASTs. I recognise that a number of you are brand new to the uni, having started mid-session, so you might not have submitted anything via EAST, but it's all there for you. So again, there's that draft feedback service, but also the plagiarism checking software. Now, what does that mean? You'll note that, and I'll take it to you in the expectations for your assignment. For all assignments that are submitted in the School of Nursing, you have to submit a Turnitin report. This is so that it is a check, if you like, that people haven't cheated and copied or colluded with others. Unfortunately, we're in a world where online and buying assessments and so forth is rife. Therefore, every university has some sort of plagiarism mechanism because, well, there's always the honesty expectation that students will do their own work, but there's always the exceptional few who will try and buck the system. But again, and listen, many of you will be familiar with the Bavesh Shah case, the case you've looked at throughout the whole session in NRS123. Just refreshing you, that was the RN who became an RN having completed a course of study at the University of Western Sydney. Many of you asked why his English was so poor and how he managed to get through university. Well, it was as a result of that a lot of these things, have been tightened up, but that's one of the reasons why in this subject I still have an examination as well. So, Turnitin. There are some videos to watch. Again, it can be time consuming, guys. So if you're not familiar, please don't leave this to the last minute because it creates stress. And if you talk to some of your colleagues, sometimes it takes a little while to get your report processed. But every assignment that's submitted via EAST, you must submit the Turnitin report. And it's, you've got to make sure it's not just a receipt, it's the actual report. I have a little video prepared by Amali Hohol, which walks you through the system, and I will post that to the website as well, but I think it's always useful for you to work your way through it independently as well. Hi everyone. Well, we've gone back through the resources that will be useful for you in doing all the background work prior to starting, getting all your materials together, or having an awareness of what is available to you. So we went through the Allen team, how to find those tips and study guides. You know now about the assignment draft feedback service and also about where to find information about the plagiarism checking software, which is your Turnitin report. We're now going to look at just about how to plan your assessment in a more focused way. And I think when I spoke about the initial task, it's really important that you research the literature before you commence. I think a lot of students tend to just jump in before doing the background work. I mean, everyone works differently, but my advice is that you need to gather yourself a number of resources. For example, start with your modules, then we'll go to the library and perhaps look at some articles that are available or books that are available and, how to do a proper search. But basically, you have to answer those 4 questions, and the quality and depth of your answers will be commensurate or dependent on the ability for you to research the topic, which is statement writing and why you do it, appropriately. So the more that background material they have available, the better your responses will be. So first place to start, I think, is your modules and your texts. All right, so I'll give you a big clue now. We're going to go to your modules and I'll show you a reading that everyone should have a look at in the first instance. So I've just been explaining how important it is to be able to access some really good resources prior to embarking on it. And I think a really good place to start is your modules. Now, the module that I think will be most relevant for preparation for this assessment task is Module 10, the coroner. In particular, the coroner and nursing staff. Now, there is a reading embedded in Module 10 and it's called the Teng reading. Teng reading. And it's a link there to that reading, and it is advice given to nursing staff should they ever be called before a coronial inquiry. And embedded within that reading, there is some advice that is given in terms of preparing statements and so forth. So that's a very good place to start. It will give you an overview. You can use that as one of your references. Yeah, it will start you with the ball rolling, if you like, and give you an idea of what you've got to do. Indeed, one of the activities that you've got to do in that module is, answer the question, what 4 pieces of advice does Teng provide to nurses if you are ever to prepare a statement for police? So that will give you the beginning point. Now, the other really useful place to go, obviously, is the library, in particular databases. So I might just do a little session quickly for you, so that, again, I encourage you to take on board the advice and resources available to you in terms of doing a library search. It is one of the most valuable things that you can have in your university career if you can do it well, because really assessments, essays, the format's just, there's a set format or a pro forma for an essay and answering questions of its case studies. What just changes is the content. Content is based on literature, and literature is found in libraries and databases, whether it's journal articles, whether it's your texts, whether it's, websites and so on. So really important that you are able to search in a really systematic and broad manner, because it's a real skill and really does make your work so much better. So I've given you some preliminary advice in having a look at Module 10, which is focused on coronial hearings, and the Teng reading in particular offers some advice for nurses in preparation of statements and if you've ever called before the coroner. So that'll get you thinking. But obviously, I suppose in terms of 1,500 words, the rule of thumb, how many references should you have? And I always get asked this a lot. But the general rule of thumb for the amount of references required is that for every 1,000 words, you should have at least 5 references. So if this is 1,500 words, we would expect a minimum of 7 references for this assessment item. So that gives you a good idea, a good overview. So you've obviously got the Teng reading for those of you who have taken the time to listen to this recording, but also you want to get a lot more available to you, and there'll be lots of different types. So what can you do? Well, you can do your Google search. You can look at some of your websites. For example, you might look at legal websites in terms of, preparing statements. You can look at the generic websites, because there'll be lots of information there. You can also have a look at the New South Wales Nurses and Midwives Association, the union. They might have something there on that website. I mean, I don't know, I haven't looked at it recently, but also you've got to be mindful of the type of reference that you're trying to access, and it's always good if you can at least access 1 or 2 good journal articles, because it's peer reviewed and it's pretty robust and valid. So how do you do a library search? Well, you're looking at my screen now. I'm on your home page, and if you go to the library, and as I say, you can look at Google Scholar, put some keywords in, and so on, do a primo search. Again, if you're really stabbing in the dark and have no clue with regard to this, then the reference librarians in the library, even over the phone, the library homepage, it's got lots of tips and guides for you. But I'll do this for you just to give you an idea. So if we go to the library, all right, and then journal databases, and you'll be faced with this. Okay, so best place to start is we'll go to nursing, because we want to look at some of the, the subject content or databases that particularly nursing focus related. So I always find CINAHL is a good database. It's very broad. Gives you allied health and nursing. There's EBSCO host, and there's a few others. So let's just go into CINAHL Plus, having a look, and then you're faced with this, and this is where a lot of students just think, how do I start? So look, you can do it as bluntly or boldly as you like, but let's look at just some keywords. Nurses, legal advice, statement, and I'll do a search and see if that pulls up anything. Obviously, the reference librarians, they give you a lot more advice on how to do it. So let's have a scroll. We've got quite a number of hits here, and you've got to be careful here. Sometimes you can have nothing, which means you're being too restricted in your search. And that's why you can maybe do a little bit of work on paper before you go into the databases. Think, what's another word for legal, law, nurses and the law, coroners' hearings, how to prepare. You've got to have you've got to think a little bit laterally in terms of what terms that you can punch in here. Legal advice for nurses, well, you never know. You might have a look at the abstract and think that might be useful for me. Legal information sheet for nurses, all a bit broad. Oh, here's one. How do I prepare a statement for the coroner? Well, look, it's the Queensland Nurse journal article. Well, there you go. Look, that would be an excellent one. So for those, again, who are listening to this, you've got something there. And it's all about you having the resources, the skills, the knowledge to do the background reading and then produce this bit of work that's going to advance your knowledge and your skill in being able to produce a statement. So that gives you some advice. All right. Obviously, I'm not going to do the assignment for you and get you lots of resources there, but there's 2 that you've already. How do I prepare a statement for the coroner? I mean, that's just hopefully going to be brilliant. I haven't looked at it, honestly, just put in a few keywords. So that highlights for you, and you can go in and out of those databases. And as I said, don't forget websites, legal websites, because remember, the catalyst is that you have got to do all the background reading on when do you prepare a statement, particularly in the nursing, what circumstances would you need to prepare a statement? What's the legal issue at hand with the case study? And you'll talk about that. What are the 4 considerations that you really must be aware of when you're putting these legal statements together? And of course, when you do your reading, you'll get advice. The Teng reading does give you quite a number of pointers. You've got a lot of rationale for that. Then you've got to actually do your mini statement on that case study from the perspective of the first year. You are the first year nursing student. All right. So hopefully that clarifies, gets you thinking. I've given you a little bit about how to start, how to, do background resource thing, then actually how to start gathering these resources, reiterating the fact you're going to need at least 7 references for this to do well. The more references you have, generally the more robust and in-depth and more, the more, the more meaty is your assignment is going to be. It's going to make sense, and it's going to be broad and really cover all those questions very, very well. All right, so just back to this slide about preparing or planning your assessment, and I've stressed the importance of accessing some good literature material that will help you put together a really good response to each of those 4 elements of your case study. So we looked at the modules, showed you the library, and then the databases. So where to find information. Now, what I want to talk about now is just the importance of the marking rubric. The marking rubric or marking criteria is pivotal in terms of providing advice to you on how your assessment will be scored. And this is a generic piece of information as applicable to any of the assignments that you're doing. So let's just look at the marking criteria for this case study. So you shouldn't have in front of you now, there's the case study assessment item. I've gone through, the 4 questions that you've got to answer and the rationale. Here's the marking rubric or marking criteria. So I'll just make sure you can see that on the screen. So again, most of you should be familiar if you've obviously completed session 1, but for some of you, pretty new. But let's look at it in relation to this assessment. So you're being scored on 20 marks are going for your academic writing, presentation and structure. So high distinction. The written paper adheres to all the formatting guidelines, which I'll talk about in a minute. It's concise, it's coherent, it's logically organized, it's easy to read, it's beautifully presented, and, it meets all academic writing conventions. It's free from errors, and it's all well developed, all right? As opposed to the other end of the spectrum, where it's disorganized, difficult to read, and you'll score quite poorly in that regard. So that gives you an idea of where your marker will place you in that criterion for academic writing. Now, second section, which is worth 60 marks, so a lot of works, that's the content of the 4 questions, if you like. Here, understanding of the protocols or guidelines required when preparing a legal statement. So if you're going to get in the 51 to 60 scoring out of 100. Remember, you'll be scored out of 100, then your mark will be converted to a mark out of 30. So if you do really well in this criterion, you'll have succinctly described 3 examples in nursing based on relevant literature where a legal statement is required. You have really just highlighted the legal issue pertinent to the case is accurately completed. You discuss 4 key factors important to consider when preparing a legal statement, and your legal statement, that the mini one that you do based on that actual case study, is a complete and accurate factual narrative, demonstrates you've got knowledge and application of the required presentation guidelines. All right, so and so on. And then you're referencing. 20 marks worth, I always think you start off with those 20 marks because you're expected to do it beautifully, just adhere to all the rules, and you only start losing them if, you haven't got enough references, or that's very poorly referenced, and you haven't submitted a Turnitin report and so on. So error-free, directed to all, guidelines and so on. Remembering too, number of references, a minimum of 7 because it's 1,500 words. So hopefully that answered that question. So in terms of presentation, how to set out this assessment? Well, obviously it's got to be typed and word processed, and just your margin, your double space your work. Font must be 12 point. Number your pages. You must have a header and a footer, student name and number. have a title page. It's nice to have a separate title page. So you're going to have your automatic cover page that will go through EASE. Then you have a page which is just your name, NRS123, assessment 2, and then next page will be question 1 in relation to this assessment. Question 1, which is, you might even put, from your search of describe 3 circumstances in nursing where you may be asked to prepare a legal statement, and then you present your 200-word response. And obviously you will have references there to support that 200-word response. Next question, you demonstrate you understand the legal issue, 400 words, obviously with references to support that response, and so on. So it's not about an essay, it's not intro, body, conclusion, it's just having your 4 questions really well set out using this here, 12-point, and so on. Remember, it's got to be logical, lucid, beautifully structured, and that's why it's so important when you do a draft, if you're really concerned, submit your draft assessment to the Allen team who can have a look at it for you. Referencing, it's all there, what you've got to follow. This isn't a referencing, you're expected to know how to do that and where to find the information. All right, so the presentation, don't overthink it. It's there, it's just 4 questions. You have the question, and then underneath your response. Make sure you're, free of spelling errors, and see how you go with that. Nothing too complex about that. All right, so I've covered the marking criteria, which is a good benchmark to see how you might want to reflect on your finished product and see how you would go by looking at the criteria. It's always hard to assess your own work, but it's a good exercise on, how much time and effort you put into it, and see how you might think you'll go. Hopefully your expectations will be rewarded. How to set out your assessment is the format. Well, I've said it's just question and answer, but make sure you have a title page and also a separate page for your references. Your references will be interspersed in your responses to each question, your in-text referencing, and then your separate page for your reference list, which will again be compiled and presented according to the APA referencing guide. Importance of having your draft reviewed. If you've got time, can't stress enough, that can be fabulous. If you're really worried about referencing, put lots of time, there's resource there, and I've said how many references. A minimum of 7 references, guys, because it's 1,500 words. Okay, now turn it in. That's that very important plagiarism detection software that shows that you have put your assignment through the plagiarism detection software, and you've obviously, not got a high score. This is an area where you don't want to get in the report, you don't want to get a high score, because a high score means that there's a lot of reproducing of work, or you haven't paraphrased appropriately. And that's, again, if you need assistance, that's where the Allen team can assist you. But you know where to find information on that. It's on your homepage under study support. And, again, make sure you know how to upload to EASE. If you've got any questions, well, that's where you'll have to ask colleagues or IT and get yourself set up for that, because there's nothing more stressful when you leave things to the last minute and then you're trying to put things in and then, it's just not worth it. So being organised earlier, and just remember that you're away for 4 weeks, particularly those who might be doing a workplace learning. You'll be on your first prac for many of you, and you'll be absolutely in another world. And then if you haven't prepared, or, you're going to come back and you'll face this essay or this assessment, and it could be very stressful. So I think if you know you're going on prac, use your 2-week break to get this really drafted out and done, and then you can forget about it, and then you're not so worried. For the rest of you, well, you've got a little bit more time to work your way through. Okay, so hopefully I've answered most of the questions. I've been keeping an eye on the forums and the discussion forums, and I've tried to answer individual questions and more broad questions. But again, obviously, if you're listening, you'll have got something out of this, and then you can go on your way. But please keep an eye on the discussion board, because if students email me individually, I'll just put a little bit of advice up there. So thanks guys, hopefully this has been useful for you and you feel more confident in attacking this assessment to the legal case study.